The call came in at 4:17 in the morning, which was never a good sign. People imagine my job involves tracking monsters through moonlit forests and coming home with stories nobody believes. The truth is less glamorous. Most of the time, it involves driving long distances, drinking terrible coffee, and listening to frightened people explain things they can barely put into words. Still, calls at 4 in the morning are different. Those are the calls that end with funerals. My name is Caleb Mercer, and for the last 17 years, I have hunted cryptids across the mountains, deserts, and forests of Idaho. I don't work for the government. I don't work for universities. I don't even work for the people who call me most of the time. I work for the rules. That probably doesn't make sense yet. It wouldn't have made sense to me either when I was 23 years old and convinced every strange story had a rational explanation waiting underneath it. Back then, I believed tracks could be identified, sounds could be explained, and missing people could always be found if someone searched hard enough. Then I spent 3 nights in the Bitterroot Mountains. After that, I stopped assuming. The phone buzzed again before I could answer it. Whoever was calling was nervous enough to hit redial. I picked up. Mercer. The voice on the other end belonged to Sheriff Nolan Reeves. That got my attention immediately. Nolan and I had known each other for nearly a decade. He only called when conventional explanations had already failed. We've got another one, he said. Not hello, not good morning, just those 4 words. I sat upright in bed. Where? North of Elk River. I rubbed my eyes. Dense forest, steep terrain, almost no cell service, not a place where people vanished easily. Not anymore. How many? I asked. There was a pause. 6. The number settled into the room like a weight. 1 missing person could be bad luck. 2 could be an accident. 6 meant something else. Tell me, Nolan exhaled slowly. Research team from Boise, Wildlife Survey. They went into the Clearwater region 4 days ago. Scheduled check-ins stopped on day 2. I swung my legs off the mattress. Search teams? 3. And? Another silence, the kind nobody enjoys hearing. They found evidence. What kind? That's why I'm calling. I was already reaching for my boots. An hour later, I was heading north through darkness. The highway cut through endless stretches of pine forest. Headlights swept across empty road signs and abandoned pullouts. Most people never realize how isolated Idaho can become once you leave the cities behind. The forests seem endless. The mountains seem older than memory. And there are places where the land feels like it belongs to something else entirely. The sun was beginning to rise when I reached the temporary command post. Sheriff Reeves was waiting beside his truck. He looked exhausted. That worried me more than anything. Nolan had spent 20 years working search and rescue operations. It took a lot to shake him. He handed me a paper cup of coffee. I took 1 sip. It was awful. That meant he had made it himself. Show me. Without speaking, he led me toward a folding table covered in maps and photographs. The first photograph showed a campsite. Nothing unusual. The second showed broken equipment. Still normal. The third photograph stopped me cold. A circle of antlers. Dozens of them. Arranged with impossible precision. Every point facing inward. Every shadow falling toward the center. I stared at it. Where was this? Half a mile from their last recorded position. I looked closer. The arrangement wasn't random. It never was. Something had built it. Something intelligent. Something patient. Nolan slid another photograph across the table. This one showed tracks, not footprints, not hoof prints. Something else. Long impressions pressed deep into wet soil. Too narrow for a bear, too large for a wolf, and spaced far enough apart to suggest an enormous stride. I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach because I had seen tracks like those before. Only once, and that case had ended badly. "You know what this is?" Nolan asked. "Maybe." That wasn't the answer he wanted. Unfortunately, it was the only honest one. The wind moved through the surrounding pines. The sound reminded me of distant whispers. I studied the map. The missing team had entered an area locals avoided, not because of cliffs, not because of weather, because of stories. Every region has them. Hunters talk, loggers talk, old ranchers talk. Most of the stories disappear after a generation. The important ones survive. This area had one that never went away. People claimed something moved through the forest at night. Something tall, something silent, something that never attacked directly. Instead, it watched, followed, waited. Then, eventually, people vanished. I looked back at the photographs, then at the forest beyond the command post. The trees stretched toward the horizon. Dark, dense, patient. A memory surfaced from years earlier. A warning spoken by an old tracker who had saved my life more than once. If you ever find the antler circles, leave before sunset. If you stay, follow the rules. And if you hear something walking beside you after dark, do not look at it. No matter what voice it uses, no matter who it sounds like, because by then, it already knows your name. And if it knows your name, the hunt has already started. I went into the forest at 9:12 that morning. Search teams had already combed the outer sections of the survey area. Bright, flagging tape hung from branches. Boot prints crossed muddy stretches of trail. Radios crackled somewhere behind me as deputies coordinated grid patterns. All of that ended within the first mile. Beyond that point, the forest became quiet. Not normal quiet. Not the comfortable silence hunters get used to after years outdoors. This was a different thing entirely. The woods felt as though they were listening. I followed the route marked on the researchers' GPS records. 4 days earlier, they had moved steadily north through a drainage lined with cedar and fir. Their pace had been professional, consistent, efficient. Nothing about the data suggested panic. That changed near midday on the second day. Their recorded movement became erratic. Small loops, abrupt changes in direction, long periods where they appeared to stand still. Then, nothing. The signal ended near a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. I reached that ridge shortly after noon. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Cold earth, wet bark, and something else. A sharp metallic scent that reminded me of old blood left on stone. I stopped moving. The forest ahead looked normal. That was exactly the problem. After 17 years in this line of work, I had learned that danger rarely announces itself. The worst places are the ones that appear ordinary until you pay attention. I crouched beside a patch of moss and studied the ground. Tracks. Several sets. Human. The missing team. They had passed through here. Then I found another set crossing theirs. One trail. Single file. Deep impressions. Far too large. I measured the stride with my eyes. Nearly 8 feet. Nothing living in Idaho should have been able to move like that. The tracks continued downhill toward the valley. So did the researchers. I followed. The descent took nearly 40 minutes. The trees thickened as elevation dropped. Sunlight became fragmented. Shadows stretched between trunks in long black strips. Halfway down, I found the first piece of equipment. A radio. The casing was cracked, The antenna had been bent completely backward. I checked the battery. Still functional. Interesting. People who panic usually cling to communication equipment. They do not abandon it unless something interrupts the decision-making process. I clipped the radio to my pack and continued. The valley floor opened before me. Grass, scattered boulders, a shallow creek winding through the center. Beautiful country. The kind photographers love. The kind experienced trackers distrust. I crossed the water and immediately spotted another marker, a second antler circle. This one was larger, much larger. At least 50 antlers arranged around a depression in the ground. I approached carefully. The depression measured roughly 6 feet across. Its edges were smooth, deliberate, like something had been sleeping there. A memory surfaced. Not mine. Someone else's words. An old Nez Perce hunter I had interviewed years ago. He called them beds. Not nests, not dens, beds, as if whatever created them was closer to a person than an animal. The thought made me uncomfortable. I stood and scanned the surrounding timber. Nothing moved, no birds, no insects, no squirrels, nothing. That absence mattered. Healthy forests are noisy. Silence means something has disrupted the natural order. I checked my watch. 1:47 p.m. Plenty of daylight remaining. Even so, a familiar feeling had begun pressing against the back of my thoughts. The sensation that I was late. Late for something important. Late for something dangerous. I ignored it. Emotions are useful. Instincts are useful. Neither should control decisions. I followed the creek north. 20 minutes later, I found the notebook. It belonged to one of the researchers. The cover was soaked. Several pages had been torn away. Most entries were routine observations about animal movement and habitat conditions. The final readable note covered only 3 lines. Something is following us. Emily heard it again last night. We should have listened. The sentence ended there. No signature, no explanation, no context, just those words. I slipped the notebook into my pack. The forest seemed darker now. Not because the sun had moved, because my attention had. Knowledge changes environments. Once you understand something is wrong, every detail begins to feel different. A snapping branch echoed somewhere ahead. I froze. The sound had come from perhaps 70 yards away. Too heavy for a deer. Too controlled for a falling limb. I listened. Nothing. Then another crack. Closer. I moved behind a cedar trunk. Years of experience took over. Slow breathing. Minimal movement. Observe before acting. The third sound came from my left. That should have been impossible. No animal could have covered that distance so quickly without making additional noise. Yet there it was, a deliberate step. Then silence. The hairs on my neck rose. Rule 1. The memory arrived immediately. Never follow movement you cannot verify. Simple. Direct. Important. I remained where I was. Seconds passed, then a minute, then 2. The forest remained motionless. Eventually, I stepped away from the tree. The moment I did, I noticed something attached to the bark at eye level. A strip of paper. Fresh. Clean. Folded neatly. My name was written on the outside. I stared at it without touching it. Nobody on the search teams knew where I was. Nobody had passed me on the trail. Yet there it hung, waiting, as though someone had known exactly when I would arrive. I already understood one thing. Whatever had taken the researchers was aware of me. The real question was, how long it had been watching. I looked around the clearing again and found no footprints, no broken branches, no sign that anyone had approached. The paper remained still, Even the breeze seemed unwilling to touch it. That bothered me more than the message. Predators hide. Storms announce themselves. But things that know your name before you arrive operate by different rules, and those rules rarely favor the people hunting them. I did not touch the paper. That decision probably saved my life. People think courage means moving forward no matter what. In reality, survival often depends on knowing when not to act. Curiosity gets more people killed in the wilderness than fear ever will. The strip of paper remained pinned against the cedar bark. My name. Nothing else. No explanation. No message. Just enough information to force a reaction. I stepped backward instead of forward. Rule 2 surfaced from memory. If something wants your attention immediately, deny it. The old trackers had repeated that lesson for generations. Predators reveal themselves through pressure. They create urgency. They push you toward decisions before you have enough information to make them. Whatever had left the paper wanted me focused on it. That meant my attention belonged somewhere else. I spent the next 30 seconds studying the ground around the tree. The soil was soft from recent rain. There should have been footprints. There were none. No human tracks. No animal tracks. Nothing. The paper looked freshly placed, yet the earth beneath it remained untouched. I felt the same sensation I always feel when reality stops behaving correctly. Not panic, recognition. The understanding that normal assumptions no longer apply. I marked the location on my map and continued north. The valley narrowed as I moved deeper into the drainage. Steep slopes rose on either side. Dense cedar gave way to thick stands of spruce. Sunlight became scarce. The temperature dropped noticeably. At first, I blamed elevation and shade. Then I checked my watch. It was barely after 2 in the afternoon. The cold felt wrong for the hour. Another detail to remember. Another detail not to ignore. I found the first researcher at 3:11 p.m. alive. Barely. He was sitting against a fallen log beside the creek. At least, he appeared to be sitting. When I got closer, I realized he had been there for a very long time. His clothes were soaked. His lips were cracked. His eyes stared straight ahead. He didn't react when I approached. "Hey, nothing." I crouched several feet away. "Can you hear me?" Slowly, his head turned. Relief hit me for half a second, then disappeared. Something was wrong with his expression. Not injury, not shock. Something deeper. The man looked terrified, not in the way frightened people normally do. This was the look of someone who had spent days expecting to die. His eyes locked onto mine. "You came back." The words were barely audible. "I just got here." He shook his head. "No." His voice trembled. "You already came back." The forest seemed to tighten around us. I remained calm. Confused people say strange things. Exhausted people say stranger things. "What happened to your team?" His breathing quickened immediately. Bad sign. Very bad sign. His hands started shaking. Then he looked over my shoulder. Not past me. Through me. As though something stood behind me that I couldn't see. I resisted the urge to turn around. That urge arrived fast. Powerful. Almost overwhelming. Rule 3. If someone looks behind you, do not. I kept my eyes on him. "What happened?" The man swallowed. "We heard voices." I said nothing. He continued. "They sounded real." His eyes watered. "At first it was family members." A pause. "My wife." Another pause. "My brother." His breathing became ragged. "We knew they weren't there." Then his expression changed. The fear deepened. Then they started saying things only we would know. The creek flowed quietly beside us. The sound felt unnaturally loud. "What happened to the others?" The man stared at the water. For several seconds, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he whispered, "They followed." The words settled heavily in the air. One sentence, enough to explain everything. Not dead, not attacked, lured. A far more dangerous possibility. I reached into my pack for water. The moment the bottle appeared, his eyes widened. "No." The reaction surprised me. "No?" His head moved violently. "Don't stay after dark." I handed him the bottle anyway. He grabbed it with both hands. His fingers were trembling so badly that water spilled down his sleeves. "You need to leave." I studied him carefully. "Can you walk?" He nodded, then hesitated, then shook his head. Neither answer looked trustworthy. His condition was deteriorating. Exposure, dehydration, psychological trauma, maybe worse. I needed to get him out. Unfortunately, the sun was already lowering behind the western ridge. Time had become a problem. A sharp whistle echoed somewhere upstream. The researcher dropped the bottle instantly. His face drained of color. I felt it too. The sound wasn't natural. It carried strange harmonics, almost like several whistles layered together. One note, then another, then silence. The researcher looked ready to run. "Did you hear that?" "Yes." His breathing accelerated. "It's early." The statement made no sense. I hated statements that made no sense. "What do you mean?" His eyes locked onto mine. "It's early." This time he sounded genuinely frightened. "Usually it waits." A second whistle drifted through the trees. Closer, much closer. The man's composure shattered. He stood so quickly he nearly fell. "We have to move." That got my attention. People in shock often freeze. They don't suddenly become decisive unless something has overridden every other concern. I rose immediately. "Which direction?" His answer came without hesitation. "South." Interesting. Toward the trailhead. Toward safety. Toward escape. Good. Then he ruined it. "Don't use the creek." The words landed wrong. Too fast. Too rehearsed. As if he had been waiting to say them. I stared at him. The researcher stared back. Neither of us spoke. Then I remembered something. An old account recorded nearly 40 years earlier. A hunter who survived a similar encounter. His final warning had been remarkably specific. "If they ever tell you not to follow water, follow water." I looked at the creek, then at the man, then back at the creek. One of us understood what was happening. The other one wanted me somewhere else before nightfall. And for the first time today, whether the man standing in front of me was actually alone, I took 3 slow steps backward. The researcher watched me carefully. Too carefully. Until that moment, I had assumed trauma explained his behavior. Missing teammates. Isolation. Days alone in hostile terrain. Any of those could break a person. But now, another possibility had entered the equation. Maybe he wasn't trying to survive. Maybe he was trying to guide me. The difference mattered. The creek flowed between smooth stones beside us. Clear mountain water. Fast enough to make noise. Fast enough to create a barrier against certain things. The researcher noticed where I was looking. His expression changed immediately. Fear became urgency. "Don't." I didn't answer. His voice rose. "You can't go that way." The certainty bothered me. People offer advice. They suggest options. They don't speak with absolute confidence unless they already know the outcome. I kept moving toward the water. The man took a step forward, then stopped. His eyes shifted briefly toward the surrounding trees, not searching, checking. The gesture lasted less than a second. That was enough. Something clicked into place. I had seen behavior like that before. Witnesses glancing toward hidden accomplices, hostages checking the reactions of captors, people unconsciously acknowledging another presence nearby. The researcher wasn't alone. Whether he realized it or not, the third whistle echoed through the forest. Closer again. This time, I could identify direction. North. Directly north. The sound came from exactly where the missing team had disappeared. The man's face tightened. "You need to listen." "No." His eyes widened. "What?" No." The word came out calm, deliberate, final. Years earlier, a tracker named Earl Jensen had explained something important to me. Creatures that hunt through deception become dangerous only after establishing conversation. The longer you engage, the more influence they gain. Break the exchange. Break the pattern. Break the trap. I stepped into the creek. The water was ice cold, instantly cold enough to hurt. Good. Pain sharpens attention. The researcher stared at me. His expression became something I still struggle to describe. Disappointment. Not concern. Not fear. Disappointment. As though I had failed a test. Then he smiled. The transformation happened so suddenly that every muscle in my body tightened. The smile looked wrong. Not physically wrong. Emotionally wrong. The expression belonged on someone greeting an old friend, not someone who had spent days terrified and alone. My hand moved toward the pistol on my belt, not because I intended to use it, because instinct demanded preparation. The man continued smiling. Then he spoke. "You should have come yesterday." The voice wasn't the same. The words emerged from his mouth, but the tone belonged to someone else. Older, deeper, patient. A wave of cold passed through me that had nothing to do with the creek. I backed farther into the water. The researcher never moved. Neither did the smile. Then another voice spoke. Not from him. From the forest. Female. Soft. Almost familiar. "Caleb." I froze. Not because I recognized the voice. Because it knew my name. The sound drifted from somewhere beyond the trees. Gentle. Inviting. "Caleb." I closed my eyes for a second. Rule 4. Names are doors. Do not answer. Do not acknowledge. Do not react. Most rules exist because somebody died discovering them. I had no intention of becoming another lesson. The voice called again. Closer. This time it sounded remarkably familiar. My stomach tightened. Not possible. Not remotely possible. The voice belonged to my sister. My younger sister had died 11 years earlier in a car accident outside Boise. I knew she was dead. I had buried her myself. Yet the voice coming through those trees matched perfectly. Every inflection, every detail, every memory. "Caleb." A pause. "Please." The researcher remained motionless on the bank, smiling, watching, waiting. The entire forest seemed to be waiting. I focused on the creek, the water, the current. Reality. Facts matter during moments like this. Facts keep people alive. My sister was dead. Therefore, the voice was false. Simple, logical, essential. The voice tried again. This time it sounded frightened, then injured, then all desperate. Each attempt adjusted slightly. Testing, learning, refining. Like a fisherman changing bait until something finally bites. I continued moving downstream. One step, then another. The researcher stayed where he was, Eventually, he disappeared behind trees. The voice did not. For nearly an hour, it followed me. Sometimes my sister, sometimes other people. An old hunting partner, a former girlfriend, even Sheriff Reeves once. Every voice perfectly reproduced. Every voice asking me to stop, to turn around, to come back. The thing behind the voices was becoming impatient. That was useful information. Patient predators, unless conditions are changing. The forest gradually darkened. Clouds had begun covering the sun. The creek widened as it descended through the valley. I checked my watch. 5:41 p.m. Not enough daylight. Not nearly enough. I needed shelter. More importantly, I needed a fire. Another rule, one of the oldest, one of the most reliable. Fire creates boundaries, not physical ones. Something deeper. Certain entities that avoid open flame the same way animals avoid cliffs. Nobody knows why. I stopped beside a gravel bar and began gathering wood. The process calmed me. Dead branches, dry bark, kindling, structure, order. Simple tasks prevent complicated fears from taking control. Within 20 minutes, I had a respectable fire burning. The flames pushed warmth into the cooling air. Good. Necessary. The voices stopped immediately. That got my attention. Not faded. Not retreated. Stopped. As though someone had flipped a switch. The silence felt heavier than the voices ever had. I sat beside the fire and studied the approaching darkness. The creek reflected orange light. The trees beyond remained black, featureless, watching. A branch cracked somewhere across the water. I didn't look. Another rule. Night belongs to them. Let darkness keep its secrets. Hours passed slowly. The fire remained strong. Twice I added larger logs. Twice the surrounding darkness seemed to retreat. Near midnight, something stepped into view. Not fully. Not enough. A shape. Tall. Far too tall. Standing between two distant cedars. Motionless. I saw it only because moonlight briefly touched one side of its outline. Then, clouds moved again. The shape vanished. My heartbeat accelerated. The fire popped loudly. I added another log. The flames surged upward. Nothing else appeared. Yet I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Something had been standing there, watching me, waiting for me, studying every decision I made. And unlike the voices, it no longer seemed interested in hiding. Because whatever game had been unfolding since I entered the valley was changing. The lure had failed. The mimicry had failed. Now the hunter was considering a different approach. And deep down, I suspected the worst part of this search had not even started yet. I stayed awake until dawn, not because I wanted to, because experience had taught me that sleep becomes a luxury when the rules start mattering. The fire burned steadily through the night. Every time the flames dipped, I fed them. Every time shadows crept closer, I added another branch. The routine gave structure to the darkness. That mattered. Fear grows fastest in empty spaces. The sky began turning gray shortly after 5 in the morning. The moment sunlight touched the tops of the trees, the pressure in the forest changed. Subtly, but unmistakably, like a room becoming easier to breathe in after someone opens a window. I stood and stretched stiff muscles. Nothing had crossed the creek during the night, at least nothing I could see. The tracks told a different story. The gravel bar behind my camp was covered with impressions. Dozens of them. Not human. Not animal. long, narrow prints pressed into wet stone, each one deeper than it should have been, each one pointing toward the fire. Not a single track crossed into the circle of blackened ground around my campsite. The boundary had held. I stared at the impressions for nearly a minute. Then I noticed something worse. There weren't dozens. There were hundreds. The entire gravel bar had been covered, every direction, every angle, as though a crowd had gathered during the night to watch me sleep. The realization settled heavily in my chest. I wasn't tracking one thing. I was moving through territory occupied by many. The antler circles suddenly made more sense. So did the disappearances. A single predator explains isolated incidents. A population explains legends. I packed quickly. The missing researchers were still somewhere ahead. The longer I remained stationary, the less chance they had. The creek continued north before bending sharply east around a granite ridge. According to my map, that ridge overlooked the area where the team's GPS signals had finally disappeared. If answers existed, they would be there. The hike took nearly 3 hours. Dense timber gave way to scattered rock fields. The terrain became steeper. Fallen trees blocked sections of the drainage, forcing detours through thick undergrowth. Several times, I found additional signs: broken equipment, scraps of clothing, food wrappers. Each discovery confirmed the same thing. The team had fragmented. Something had separated them intentionally. Classic predator behavior. Divide, confuse, isolate, finish. Around mid-morning, I found another survivor. This one nearly shot me. The rifle cracked through the trees without warning. The round struck a boulder less than 10 feet away. Stone exploded beside my head. I dropped instantly. "Don't shoot!" Silence, then movement. A figure emerged from behind a fallen cedar. Female, late 30s, thin, exhausted, holding a hunting rifle with shaking hands. Dr. Emily Carter, the team leader. Her university photo had shown confidence and professionalism. The woman standing in front of me looked 20 years older. Recognition crossed her face. Then relief. Then immediate suspicion. "You came alone?" "Yes." She lowered the rifle slightly. "Not enough." "Good. People who lower weapons completely in dangerous situations tend not to survive long." I moved into view carefully. "No one else?" She shook her head. "Nobody." The answer came too fast, too absolute. Not necessarily dishonest, but damaged. Trauma compresses thinking. I approached slowly. Emily studied me the entire time. Eventually, she lowered the rifle completely. "How many made it?" The question carried enormous weight. I already knew that. One survivor downstream. Her eyes closed briefly. Not surprise. Confirmation. She already suspected. Maybe she already knew. "What happened here?" Emily sat on a fallen log. For several seconds, she didn't speak. Then, words started coming out in pieces. Broken fragments. Disconnected memories. The first night had been normal. The second night, they heard voices. The third night, people started wandering. By the fourth day, reality itself seemed unreliable. Distances changed. Landmarks moved. Compasses stopped working. Time became inconsistent. Every detail matched older reports. Every detail matched stories most people dismissed as folklore. Then Emily said something new. Something I had never heard before. There was a place. I waited. A clearing. Her voice dropped. "They kept taking us toward it." That got my attention immediately. Predators chase. They corner. They trap. They do not normally guide. Unless the destination matters. "Describe it." Emily swallowed. Her hands trembled visibly. There were antlers. Not surprising. How many? Her eyes focused on something far away. Hundreds. A pause. Maybe thousands. The forest suddenly felt much colder. Large ritual sites had appeared in a handful of historical accounts. Almost nobody who found them survived. Those who did rarely agreed on details. Except one. Every witness described an overwhelming urge to walk into the center, as though something inside the clearing was calling them, not physically, psychologically. The thought unsettled me. I looked toward the ridgeline. The area ahead suddenly seemed much more important. Emily followed my gaze. You can't go there. I almost laughed. People kept telling me that. Nobody offered alternatives. Why? Her answer came immediately. Because it wants you to. The words lingered between us. Simple, terrifying, possibly true. Predators don't reveal dens accidentally. If I had been guided toward that location, there was a reason. The question was whether avoiding it improved our chances. A distant sound interrupted my thoughts. Clicking. Dry. Rhythmic. Somewhere above us. Emily's face drained of color instantly. She heard it too. The clicking came again. Closer. Much closer. For the first time since entering the forest, I saw genuine panic in another survivor's eyes. And judging by her reaction, whatever was making that sound was far more dangerous than the voices had ever been. The clicking echoed across the ridge a third time. Emily stood so fast that the fallen log tipped backward behind her. Move. There was no hesitation in her voice now. No uncertainty. Only survival instinct. I trusted that. People can lie. Fear usually doesn't. We moved immediately. Downhill first, then east, through a stand of dense spruce where the branches hung low enough to block visibility beyond 20 feet. Boo. Emily knew the terrain better than I expected. She wasn't choosing directions at random. She was following a route she had memorized during the previous days. The clicking followed. Never closer. Never farther. Always present. That was somehow worse. Predators chase when they think prey might escape. This thing already believed it would catch us eventually. We crossed a narrow drainage and entered thicker timber. The sound stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. I hated that, more than the noise itself. Emily noticed my expression. It's waiting? For what? She looked over her shoulder. Night. The answer felt painfully believable. We continued moving. Around noon, we reached a rocky overlook above a basin hidden between 3 ridgelines. The view opened for miles. And there it was, the clearing. Even from a distance, I knew immediately. No natural process could have created what I was seeing. Antlers covered the ground. Thousands of them, white against dark earth, arranged in spirals, concentric circles, geometric patterns visible only from above. At the center stood a single structure, not a cabin, not a shelter, a tower, built entirely from antlers, 30 feet tall, maybe more. The sight stopped me cold. Every instinct told me to look away. Instead, I studied it carefully. Patterns matter. Details matter. The tower wasn't random. It had been constructed deliberately over many years, maybe decades, maybe longer, which meant something had been collecting materials, maintaining the site, protecting it. The implications were enormous. Emily stepped backward. We need to leave. I didn't answer. Something moved near the base of the tower, too distant to identify. Then another shape appeared. Then another. Tall, pale, watching. Not one creature, several. My stomach tightened. The gravel bar from the previous night suddenly made sense. This wasn't a lone cryptid haunting remote wilderness. This was a population, a society, maybe even a territory defended across generations. The realization changed everything. A voice drifted across the basin. Not loud, not human. A strange layered sound carrying impossible distance. The shapes around the tower began moving, slowly, deliberately, toward the outer edge of the clearing, toward us. That ended the debate. Move. This time I said it. Emily didn't argue. We left immediately. The descent became a controlled sprint through difficult terrain. Branches whipped against our clothes. Loose stones shifted underfoot. Twice, Emily nearly fell. Neither of us slowed. The forest behind us remained silent. Far too silent. Hours passed. Then the trees gradually opened. A familiar sound reached us. Running water. Strong water. Wide water. The main river. Relief hit me so hard it almost felt painful. Moving water had appeared in every reliable account I had ever collected. Cross it. Follow it. Stay near it. Simple rules often survive because they work. We reached the river shortly before sunset. Broad current. Fast flow. Cold enough to numb skin within seconds. Perfect. I finally allowed myself to breathe. Emily sat heavily on a boulder. For the first time since meeting her, she looked exhausted instead of terrified. That felt like progress. Then she pointed upstream. Someone was standing on the opposite bank, a man, motionless, watching. Distance obscured details. Even so, I recognized him immediately. The first survivor. The researcher from the creek. He shouldn't have been there. He certainly shouldn't have reached the river before us. Yet there he stood, perfectly still. The fading sunlight touched his face. He was smiling again. The same wrong smile. The same patient expression. Neither of us spoke. The river rushed between us. The man never moved. Eventually, darkness deepened enough that his features disappeared. Then his outline vanished entirely. Gone. As though he had never existed. Emily stared at the empty bank. What was that? I considered several answers. None felt honest. So I gave the only one I trusted. I don't know. Night settled over the valley. We built a fire beside the water. A real fire. Large, bright, anchored. The kind old trackers respected. Nothing approached. No voices called from the darkness. No clicking echoed through the trees. Only the river remained. Constant. Reliable. Real. At dawn, we followed the water south. By afternoon, we reached the first search teams. Emily made it out. So did I. Official reports blamed exposure, disorientation, and wilderness hazards. Official reports always do. 3 bodies were eventually recovered. 2 people were never found. The clearing was never located again, despite multiple searches. Neither was the tower. Neither were the antler spirals. As for me, I returned home and completed the same ritual I perform after every job. Clean equipment. Inspect clothing. Check every strap. Every buckle. Every pocket. That was when I found the antler fragment. Small. White. Wedged deep inside the stitching of my pack. I held it under a lamp for several minutes. No explanation made sense. I had never entered the clearing. I had never touched the tower. Yet somehow a piece of it had come back with me. I locked it away. Some souvenirs aren't worth keeping close. A week later, Sheriff Reeves called. Another team had reported strange sounds near the same region. Different people, different season, same area. Before hanging up, he asked a simple question. "Are you going back?" I looked toward the mountains outside my window. The answer came easily. Because the rules still mattered. Because people would keep disappearing. And because somewhere in those forests, something ancient still waited beside an antler tower, hidden from every map. "Yeah," I told him. "I'm going back."